On a peaceful evening in the upscale restaurant district of Susiong, the air was filled with laughter and chatter. Suddenly, the atmosphere turned nightmarish when a stranger lunged forward and stabbed someone, killing them on the spot. To trace the beginning of this tragedy, we must go back to 1996, when 38-year-old Hwang Jung-gu was running the Andal restaurant in Suseong district, Daegu. Despite its official designation as a restaurant, Andal operated more like an illegal bar with female hostesses serving male patrons. In reality, although the venue was licensed as a regular eatery, its interior was sectioned off with partitions between tables, staffed by women pouring drinks, and posted with unusually high prices. The establishment had previously been shut down for violations, but reopened in March 1994 and continued operating under the same format for 2 more years. During that time, the staff at Andal also changed. Just 1 week before the incident, 3 new women had joined: 25-year-old Kim Gwang, 24-year-old Shin Mi-gi, and 19-year-old Kim Yang, who had come from Changnyong County, South Gyeongsang Province. Alongside 20-year-old No Hwa-soo and the owner Hwang Jung-gu, a total of 5 women were working there. It was in this seemingly ordinary setting that, on the night of July 9th, 2 young men from a group known as Friendship were the first to arrive at Andal. Hwa-soo served their table, and the 3 began drinking in a relaxed, cheerful atmosphere. Soon after, another group of men arrived and sat at a nearby table, several individuals estimated to be in their 20s to 30s. They loudly ordered hard liquor and beer, demanding both be brought out at once. After just a few rounds, the group became heavily intoxicated and started causing a commotion. Coincidentally, Kim Gwang and Shin Mi-gi were the ones attending to their table. That's when things spiraled out of control. Although the bar only had about 2 occupied tables, the room quickly descended into chaos. The sound of bottles smashing was followed by yelling and fighting. The situation worsened as screams from the women and the crash of falling furniture echoed throughout the small venue. Before anyone could fully grasp what was happening, the friendship group stood up in alarm, only to be confronted by the men from the adjacent table. Holding a blood-stained knife, they shouted threats and demanded money. Terrified, the victims opened their wallets, handing over a check worth $74 and approximately $218 in cash. But the horror didn't stop with robbery. The assailants dragged Hwa-soo from the friendship table into a back room. There, she found owner Hwang Jung-gu lying in a pool of blood, having already been fatally stabbed. Out of sheer fear, Hwa-soo complied with their orders, retrieving a bundle of cash from the owner's handbag and handing it over. What stood out was that even after getting the money, the perpetrators didn't flee in haste. Instead, they began erasing evidence in an almost methodical way. They collected every liquor bottle, glass, and cigarette butt they had used. In an even more disturbing move, they forced the members of the friendship group to remove their clothing, took everything, and calmly exited through the front door. Police were notified shortly afterward and arrived promptly at the scene. Authorities sealed off the area and began their investigation. That very day, 3 people were found dead inside the establishment. The identities of the victims were quickly confirmed. The owner, Hwang Jung-gu, was found dead in a back room. Kim Gwang, who had been serving the table of the attackers, was discovered lifeless in the restroom. Shin Mi-gi was found in the main hall, lying face up with multiple stab wounds to her chest and abdomen. In addition to the 3 women who were killed on the spot, another victim, Kim Yang, a newly hired waitress, was stabbed 6 times in the abdomen and back, causing severe injuries to her liver, lungs, and nearly severing 1 kidney. Despite her critical condition, she was still breathing when found and was rushed to the hospital in time to survive. Based on the scene and the method of the killings, police quickly concluded that this was not the perpetrator's first violent act. After murdering their victims, the attackers carefully cleaned up any potential evidence, including liquor bottles, drinking glasses, and cigarette butts. They even took the witnesses' clothing, likely to delay them from alerting authorities. Beyond the sheer brutality, the speed and precision with which they attacked and killed 4 women strongly suggested experience and prior planning. Although the crime scene had been meticulously wiped, investigators were able to collect further evidence. 8 unidentified fingerprints found on the attacker's table and in the men's restroom. However, in 1996, Korea's automated fingerprint identification system was still in its early stages. Even if a suspect had a prior record and their prints were stored in a database, that data wasn't yet accessible nationwide. As a result, the police couldn't trace any of the 8 fingerprints. None matched any existing profiles. With forensic data limited, authorities had to rely heavily on the testimony of surviving witnesses. These included Kim Yang, who survived the stabbing, the 2 men from the friendship group, and Hwa-soo. Based on their descriptions, police sketched out profiles of the suspects. 2 men, estimated to be in their early 30s, both around 5 feet 7 inches tall, one with curly hair and the other with a short, athletic-style haircut. The composite sketches were distributed nationwide, generating over 30 tips, but none led to credible suspects connected to the crime. Meanwhile, Daegu police shifted focus to an unsettling possibility: that the killers had intentionally left behind 3 witnesses capable of identifying them: the 2 men from the friendship group and Hwa-soo. As for Kim Yang, while she survived, authorities believe the assailants likely assumed she was dead due to the severity of her injuries. One detail particularly caught investigators' attention. Although the attackers forced the 2 men to strip, they made no attempt to further harm them. This led police to suspect that the original target of the violence may have been the women working at Andal. Adding weight to this theory, survivor Kim Yang testified that the attackers seemed unusually familiar with the layout of the establishment. That detail prompted police to consider whether the perpetrators were regular customers who had personal conflicts with the 3 murdered women. However, this theory was quickly dismissed when police discovered that 2 of the 3 victims had only started working at the bar less than a week earlier. Such a short period made it unlikely for any serious conflict to have developed, especially one involving both the owner, Hwang Jong-gu, and the 2 newly hired employees at the same time. To leave no possibility unexamined, investigators continued to explore the regular customer angle. They reviewed 28 phone numbers found in the victims' and former employees' address books, but uncovered nothing suspicious. Outgoing calls from the store's phone line also provided no useful leads. Just as the Andal case was reaching a dead end, another serious incident occurred in the same area. Late at night on August 8th, exactly 1 month after the Andal murders, the Daegu Police Department received a frantic emergency call from a woman claiming her husband had been kidnapped. The kidnappers were demanding a ransom of $110,000. The victim was 44-year-old Woo Seong-guk, a high school math teacher. In several phone calls, the criminals repeatedly threatened to kill him if the ransom wasn't paid on time. Due to the severity of the situation, police devised a trap. They told the kidnappers the ransom was ready and instructed the wife to bring the money to a designated drop-off location while officers prepared to ambush the suspects. The sting operation was launched 2 days later at 3 p.m. on August 10th, when the victim's wife arrived at the coffee shop as instructed. Plainclothes officers were already positioned nearby, waiting for the suspects to appear. After some time passed with no sign of the kidnappers, one officer noticed a suspicious man scanning the area repeatedly. Acting quickly, the team closed in and apprehended him. A fingerprint check confirmed a match with those recovered from the Andal crime scene, proving he was responsible for both the kidnapping and the earlier murders. What shocked investigators even more was the suspect's identity: 33-year-old Park Gwang, a man with a notorious reputation in the neighborhood due to his delinquent behavior since childhood. Despite growing up in a wealthy household, his father owned a rental property business that brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. Park had been academically successful, intelligent, sociable, and well-liked by his peers. He seemed the complete opposite of a typical violent criminal. However, things took a drastic turn in the 9th grade when Park ran away from home. He was later prosecuted for theft, and by age 19, he committed a far more serious crime: arson and murder. He had attempted to steal cattle by setting fire to a livestock market. While fleeing the scene, he was discovered by a property owner, whom he then killed. For this crime, Park Gwang was sentenced to 15 years in prison. What's more disturbing is that he was granted a special pardon during a national amnesty for Buddha's birthday on May 24, 1996. Less than 2 months after his release, Park carried out the brutal robbery and murder at the Andal bar, followed by the high-profile kidnapping, and Park wasn't acting alone. He had 2 accomplices, 24-year-old Hyung-oh and 31-year-old Young-hwa, both of whom he had met during his time in prison. Specifically, about a year before his release, Park met Hyung-oh while incarcerated. One was serving a 7-year sentence for killing his adoptive father. As both were convicted murderers, the two quickly bonded and maintained contact even after their respective releases. By 1996, both men had been released from prison and remained in frequent contact. On the night of July 8th, the exact night of the murders, they met up as usual and decided to go out drinking together. They began at a street-side bar, and around 11:30 p.m., they moved to Andal. There, they were served alcohol by Kim Gwang and Shin Mi-gi. Over the course of nearly 10 hours, the two drank an entire bottle of hard liquor and several bottles of beer. As their behavior became increasingly erratic from the heavy drinking, Kim Gwang grew concerned that trouble might arise. She proactively brought over a preliminary bill. The total came to $218, a significant amount for 1996, especially for an illegal underground bar like Andal. That figure instantly set off the perpetrators. They raised their voices, claiming the price was outrageous for a place posing as a regular restaurant. They felt deceived and taken advantage of. Kim Gwang, however, was used to dealing with unruly customers. Calmly, she explained that the prices were fixed by the owner and not something she could change. During the argument, Park Gwang suddenly stood up, claiming he needed to use the restroom. Sensing something suspicious, Kim Gwang quietly followed him. Once they were out of sight of the other customers, she coldly told him, "If you can't afford $218, then maybe you shouldn't be drinking here. Coming in without money just makes you look pathetic." Those words struck a nerve. Park Gwang's expression shifted instantly, from embarrassed to cold and deadly. As a recently released convict with a history of murder, he carried deep-seated insecurities and fragile pride. Kim's comment felt like an insult that shredded what was left of his dignity. Consumed by rage, Park stormed into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and violently stabbed Kim Gwang. Her screams alerted the bar owner, Hwang Jung-woo, who rushed to the scene. Without hesitation, he dragged her into the back room and stabbed her to death with the same weapon. Still not satisfied, Park clenched his jaw and returned to the main hall, where he coldly killed Shin Mi-gi, afraid she might report him. At that moment, Kim Yang was seated at another table, farther away, unaware of the unfolding chaos. But as she approached after hearing Shin Mi-gi's groans, she too became a victim of his frenzied stabbing. After the brutal rampage, once the adrenaline began to wear off, Park Gwang and Hyung-oh started plotting their escape. Realizing there was no turning back, they robbed the customers at the next table and took an additional $1,000 in cash from Hwang Jung-woo's handbag before fleeing the scene. Immediately after leaving the bar, the two men returned to Park's house. Along the way, they disposed of the murder weapon, bottles, glasses, and cigarette butts in roadside trash bins. Once home, they showered, changed clothes, and discarded their blood-stained clothing and shoes in a dumpster near the house to eliminate any evidence. But even after committing such a heinous crime, their thirst for violence wasn't quenched. The duo decided to escalate their actions and began planning another crime, this time a kidnapping. They enlisted Young-hwa, another former prison acquaintance, forming a trio on the hunt for their next target. Their chosen victim was Woo Seong-guk, a high school math teacher they had come to know in passing. During the boom in private education, especially in subjects like mathematics, they assumed Woo was making good money from tutoring and saw him as an ideal target for extortion. Following their plan, the group posed as concerned parents and called Woo Seong-guk, asking him to tutor their child who was struggling with math. On August 8th, they arranged to meet him at a seafood restaurant. Trusting the request, Woo Seong-guk arrived on time, only to be kidnapped by the three men. 2 days later, around August 10th, Park Gwang was spotted acting suspiciously while pacing outside a coffee shop and was arrested by police. At the same time, Hyung-oh and Young-hwa were circling the neighborhood in a car, with Woo Song-guk still locked inside the trunk, completely unnoticed. The two men were standing by, waiting for Park Gwang to collect the ransom money. But the moment they saw him being arrested right in front of the cafe, they panicked. Realizing their plan had collapsed, they sped away. Although police pursued them, the suspects managed to escape. During their flight, they abandoned Woo Song-guk in the middle of the road and disappeared without a trace. Using that lead, police began monitoring the suspects' family members, assuming that once they ran out of money, the fugitives would eventually reach out to relatives. That theory proved correct when a withdrawal of $1,000 in cash was made from a bank account under the name of Young-hwa's mother. Based on that transaction, police suspected that Young-hwa would soon appear to collect the money and was likely hiding nearby. They expanded their search to the Bisandong area of Daegu. And just as predicted, in the early morning hours of August 15th, both Hyung-oh and Young-hwa were captured while hiding out in an abandoned house. With all suspects now in custody, the investigation quickly shifted toward uncovering the motive behind the crimes. Initially, police suspected a personal revenge plot, theorizing that the three female victims might have known the perpetrators. However, that theory was dismissed after it was discovered that two of the victims had only worked at the bar for a week and had no known connection to Hwang Jong-gu. That said, Kim Yang, the surviving victim who played a key role in helping police develop a suspect sketch, insisted that the man she saw had a slimmer face, longer hair, and noticeable sideburns, which didn't match the composite police had initially released. It seemed the investigation had hit another dead end. But the case ultimately revealed a serious flaw in Korea's fingerprint identification system. Both Park Gwang and Young-hwa were ex-convicts with prior murder convictions, and their fingerprints had been recorded. Yet during the investigation, police were still unable to identify the mastermind due to a lack of centralized fingerprint data. It wasn't until the first trial in December 1996, 4 months after the crimes, that the full story began to unfold. The court sentenced Park Gwang to death, citing the fact that he had committed murder and kidnapping less than 2 months after being granted a suspended sentence. The judge ruled that he had shown no intention of reforming his life. As for the other defendants, Hyung-oh, though complicit in the Andal bar incident, had not directly participated in the killings. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for organized robbery and kidnapping for ransom. Young-hwa, who had no involvement in the Andal murders, was charged solely with kidnapping and extortion and received a 12-year prison sentence. At the appellate trial, the court upheld the death sentence for Park Gwang, despite his repeated pleas for clemency. However, due to their cooperative attitude and honest testimonies during the investigation, Hyung-oh and Young-hwa received reduced sentences, 10 years and 7 years in prison, respectively. Still, Park Gwang continued to appeal, but every attempt was rejected by the courts. As of today, he holds the record as the longest-serving death row inmate in South Korea, having been incarcerated for over 28 years. What's even more surprising are the reports from inside the prison. Park managed to complete his middle school equivalency while behind bars and even earned a bachelor's degree from a broadcasting and communications university. And it didn't stop there. In 2009, he registered a patent related to renewable energy. By 2018, with assistance from Daegu Correctional Facility, he underwent a DNA test and was reunited with his biological mother, a woman he had long dreamed of meeting. From a serial killer to a university graduate with a renewable energy patent, Park Gwang's life trajectory has left many both disturbed and bewildered. But the lingering question remains: can rehabilitation behind bars truly erase the blood on one's hands? This case doesn't just expose the darkness within one man, it's a sobering reminder of systemic legal gaps in society's indifference to the smallest warning signs. That same indifference came at a chilling cost years later, when a seemingly routine call was received by Seongnam Police Station in Gyeonggi Province on October 10, 2012. No one could have predicted that the report would unravel a grim sequence of events. The call came from a man and his wife, concerned about the husband's father, Mr. Song, a 78-year-old man who lived alone and had been out of contact for a month. At first glance, it appeared to be a minor family issue. But when police began speaking to neighbors, they heard something odd. The landlord and several acquaintances all claimed Mr. Song had gone on vacation. Following these statements, investigators checked Mr. Song's phone records and found that he had indeed made calls to several acquaintances. However, strangely, he had not answered any calls from his family or the police. Because of this, authorities initially leaned toward the possibility that he had simply left home voluntarily. After all, Mr. Song had reportedly informed others about his travel plans, and he seemed mentally sharp despite his advanced age. Still, something didn't sit right. As the investigation deepened, a disturbing detail emerged. Several of the people who received calls from Mr. Song's number claimed the voice on the other end wasn't his. It was a young man who identified himself as Mr. Song's son and said his father was traveling and wouldn't be reachable for a while. That raised red flags. Sensing foul play, the police began a more thorough investigation. That's when a new and troubling truth came to light. Mr. Song had apparently been entangled in a financial dispute shortly before he vanished. Digging further into his recent history, officers discovered that as of May 2012, just 5 months before his disappearance, Mr. Song was still operating a small bar in the Sinhungdong neighborhood of Seongnam, where he regularly played the saxophone for customers. As Mr. Song's health began to decline and managing the bar became increasingly difficult, he decided to transfer ownership to Ms. Kim, a 30-year-old woman introduced to him by a mutual friend. After some discussion and mutual agreement, Mr. Song agreed to sell the bar to Ms. Kim for $32,500. However, she explained she was short on cash at the time and could only pay $18,000 up front, promising to pay the remaining $14,500 later. Although he no longer managed the business, Mr. Song continued visiting the bar regularly to play the saxophone as he had before. But as time passed, Ms. Kim kept postponing the payment of the remaining amount. Growing increasingly anxious, Mr. Song began pressuring her to follow through on the original agreement. According to people working nearby, the unpaid balance became a source of ongoing frustration for Mr. Song. He was often heard saying that once he received the remaining $14,500, he would stop performing and step away from everything entirely. Until then, he felt compelled to keep showing up at the bar, waiting to be paid. At the time, Ms. Kim wasn't running the business alone. She was in a romantic relationship with Mr. Park, a 40-year-old man. As the tension between Mr. Song and Ms. Kim escalated over the delayed payment, Mr. Park stepped in. He reassured Mr. Song that he would try to come up with the money and settle the debt soon. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. But the promise was never fulfilled. When police began investigating Mr. Song's disappearance, they found no banking records indicating that the remaining amount had ever been paid. The inconsistencies in the statements and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the unpaid debt led police to suspect that Ms. Kim and Mr. Park might have been involved in Mr. Song's disappearance. Both were quickly summoned for questioning. Ms. Kim claimed that Mr. Park had promised to take care of the payment and that she didn't know anything beyond that. Mr. Park, on the other hand, insisted that he had already paid the remaining amount in June and no longer had any financial ties to Mr. Song. Police pressed Mr. Park on where and when he had made the payment. He said he had paid in cash, which meant there were no bank records. However, when investigators checked surveillance footage from the ATM where he claimed to have withdrawn the money, there was no sign of him. Even so, Mr. Park maintained his innocence, claiming the lack of evidence was due to the cash nature of the transaction and the absence of a receipt. Though detectives were increasingly suspicious of Mr. Park, suspicion alone wasn't enough to warrant formal charges, so they shifted their focus to his phone records in hopes of finding more concrete evidence. That's when something unusual caught their attention. On September 13th, about a month before the official investigation began, Mr. Park had contacted a construction company to perform waterproofing work inside the bar. What raised eyebrows was what happened next. Immediately after the work was completed, Mr. Park deleted the construction company's number from his phone, as if deliberately trying to erase all traces of the interaction. Investigators dug deeper and eventually tracked down Mr. Wu, the contractor responsible for the job. What he revealed would become a critical breakthrough in the case. According to Mr. Wu, an unusual incident occurred during the construction work. Initially, he had only been hired to handle waterproofing, as water had seeped through the lobby wall. This required removing the entire interior layer of the wall. But just as he was preparing to replaster it, Mr. Park suddenly asked him to place a large wooden box inside the wall and seal it completely with cement, almost as if he wanted to hide something before the job was finished. Mr. Woo's initial reaction was one of frustration, as the box was oversized and would cause the wall to protrude, ruining its appearance. But Mr. Park insisted. When Mr. Woo asked why, he was told the box was a dehumidifier meant to absorb moisture. Mr. Park even promised to pay extra. Since this was his livelihood, Mr. Woo reluctantly agreed to proceed. The mysterious box was then embedded into the wall exactly as requested. Throughout the construction, Mr. Park never left the site for even a moment, watching the process intently. Notably, he frequently sprayed perfume around the area and repeatedly emphasized that there must be absolutely no unusual odors left behind. These bizarre behaviors deepened the police's suspicions. They quickly went to the restaurant and began searching for the large wooden box supposedly hidden inside the wall. Sure enough, they found a protruding section that looked out of place. The forensics team didn't hesitate. They immediately smashed open that part of the wall with hammers. Once the cement was broken away, a large wooden box was revealed, measuring approximately 44.5 inches wide, 15.7 inches deep, and 31.5 inches tall. The box was tightly sealed with silicone at every corner, with no visible gaps, resembling a coffin. When police removed the lid, they found a suitcase inside, and within it was Mr. Song's body, tightly wrapped in plastic bags. This shocking discovery became a major turning point in the investigation. On November 13th, police issued a warrant and arrested Mr. Park. The victim's body had been found, and witness testimony confirmed that Mr. Park was the one who hired the worker to conceal the box inside the wall. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Mr. Park quickly confessed to the murder. According to his statement, the killing took place on September 6th. That evening, around 6 p.m., the two men met privately at the restaurant. Mr. Park claimed that of the remaining $14,500, he had paid $13,000 in cash. When Mr. Song questioned why the final $1,500 hadn't been paid, Mr. Park explained that he had used the money to install a water sprinkler system at the restaurant and considered it a necessary expense that should be deducted. Mr. Park argued that the cost of repairs should fall on the former owner and wanted to settle at $13,000. However, Mr. Song strongly disagreed, demanding full payment as originally agreed and becoming visibly angry. The argument escalated quickly, voices rose, tensions flared, and the atmosphere grew increasingly hostile. According to Mr. Park, the breaking point came when Mr. Song began insulting Ms. Kim, a woman with whom Park was romantically involved. Enraged, Park shoved him forcefully, causing Mr. Song to fall to the floor. But instead of stopping there, he proceeded to stomp violently on the victim's neck. After the stomp, the victim quickly lost consciousness and lay completely motionless. Still overcome with rage, Park went into the kitchen, grabbed a section of pipe, and strangled the victim until he stopped breathing. Once he confirmed the man was dead, he wrapped the body in plastic bags, tied it tightly with cords, and placed it inside a suitcase in preparation for disposal. But after committing the murder, Park became panicked and unsure of how to discreetly get rid of the body. With no immediate plan, he temporarily hid the suitcase in the restaurant's storage room and continued running the business as if nothing had happened. However, within just a few days, the body began decomposing and emitting a foul odor, prompting employees to repeatedly complain about a strange smell in the storage area. As he scrambled for a solution, Park realized that carrying a large suitcase outside would be caught on surveillance cameras, inevitably exposing him. On top of that, the suitcase was too heavy to move alone without attracting attention. So, he decided to hide the body somewhere inside the restaurant, but that wasn't easy, since customers and staff were constantly coming and going. After much hesitation, he came up with the idea of concealing the body inside the wall using a custom-built wooden box. Park placed the suitcase inside, sealed all the edges with silicone to trap any odor, and then called in a contractor under the pretense of waterproofing. He used the ongoing construction as cover to secretly bury the box inside the wall, completely unnoticed. Once everything was in place, Mr. Park appeared completely calm and resumed business as usual. During that time, diners continued to eat, drink, and chat, unaware that just behind the very wall they were sitting next to was a hidden corpse. Meanwhile, in an effort to buy time and deflect suspicion, Park devised a more calculated plan. He used the victim's phone to call acquaintances, pretending to be Mr. Song's son and claiming that his father had gone on a trip. As a result, Mr. Song's actual son didn't realize anything was wrong for nearly a month. Park didn't stop there. He went on to erase as many traces of the victim as possible. He sold all of Mr. Song's saxophones, impersonated him in a phone call to the landlord, and transferred the business license over to Ms. Kim. In court, Park claimed it was a spontaneous act of violence, but the fact that he strangled the victim while he was already unconscious clearly indicated intent. Additionally, his claim about the $13,000 cash payment had no supporting evidence. Given these facts, prosecutors argued that Park's actions were premeditated and cruel, recommending a 20-year prison sentence. However, after reviewing the case and testimonies, the court ultimately sentenced him to 18 years in prison. Yet, as the investigation expanded, another disturbing truth emerged. Park was not new to crime. He had 12 prior convictions for theft and fraud. While he had never before been charged with murder, his extensive criminal history led many to believe that an 18-year sentence was too lenient for someone who had taken another person's life. Adding to public skepticism was another troubling detail. Ms. Kim, who was romantically involved with Park and registered as the restaurant's operator, was not held criminally responsible. Police investigated the possibility of her being an accomplice, but found no evidence or indication that she was directly involved in the crime. That's why Park's decision to hide a body inside a wall, right in the middle of a busy restaurant, was considered an incredibly reckless move. According to forensic experts, a decomposing body produces gas that causes it to bloat. The pressure from this gas can eventually crack the wooden enclosure and cause the outer cement layer to crumble over time, significantly increasing the risk of discovery. In the end, both cases prove one undeniable truth. No matter how carefully a crime is planned, the truth will always come to light under the weight of justice. Park Gwang, a serial killer with a deeply troubled past, and Park, the man who buried a corpse inside a bar wall, both ultimately faced the full force of the law. What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next case.